ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Liesel had faced madness before, but nothing in her long, twisted life had prepared her for the revelation now crashing down upon her like a fractured memory she could not escape. For years she had carried the guilt, the grief, the warped pride and painful longing tied to her son Nathan. She believed she had buried the darkest chapters of her past along with him, sealing away the sins that had shaped her motherhood into something fragile, bitter, and unforgettable. But now, as whispers spread through Port Charles about the possibility of two Nathans walking the earth, two men with the same fractured history, but only one truly bound to her, Liesel found herself standing at the edge of a truth so disturbing it twisted her breath into knots. One of these men was her son. The other, she did not know. And that ignorance, that terrible uncertainty ripped through her like a scalpel without mercy. At first she tried to dismiss the rumors as foolishness born from grief and hope colliding in dangerous ways. But the stories grew too detailed, too specific, too aligned with the strange, inexplicable behaviors she herself had observed. The Nathan who returned lacked memories that mattered. He laughed too easily at pain, wandered too freely into emotional territory he once guarded with his life, and seemed curiously detached from the relationships that had once defined him, especially Maxie. Liesel watched him approach Lulu with a strange, unsettling charm, while showing little concern for the woman he had claimed to love with a depth that transcended tragedy. These were not the instincts of her Nathan. These were the instincts of someone wearing his face without understanding the weight of it. The deeper Liesel looked, the more she realized she was no longer dealing with resurrection or recovery. She was dealing with duplication, manipulation, a deception so elaborate that even trained eyes could not immediately unravel it. Somewhere, someone had split Nathan's legacy into two living embodiments, one real, one constructed, one born of her blood and one born of someone else's agenda. The implications were horrifying. If there were two Nathans, then one of them had been forced into existence through means Liesel knew all too well: unethical science, illegal experimentation, genetic engineering hidden behind layers of secrecy. She recognized the fingerprints of such darkness because she herself had walked in its shadows. But what shattered her the most was not the science. It was motherhood. It was the sickening realization that she did not immediately know which Nathan belonged to her, which heartbeat she had nurtured, which soul she had once defended with ferocity. The idea that she might be embracing an impostor, or worse, failing to protect her true son, ignited a rage so primal it took all her strength to keep from tearing apart the Azwen, a world around her. Liesel Obrecht was many things, but above all she was a mother who had lost too much to lose again. And just when the weight of this discovery threatened to crush her, Maxie re-emerged into the picture like a storm blowing open a locked door. Her presence, fragile and fierce all at once, turned every unresolved question into a blazing crisis. If Maxie woke to find that the man at her side might not be Nathan at all, if she realized she had shared her grief, her loyalty, her memories with a stranger, then everything would unravel. Liesel knew Maxie's heart could only survive so many betrayals. She had already endured Peter's lies, Peter's manipulations, Peter's careful construction of false hope. To learn that someone else, someone wearing Nathan's face, might be another product of that same sinister legacy, would break her in ways she might never recover from. That made Maxie not just a complication but a variable of catastrophic importance. Her emotions, her reactions, her proximity to the wrong Nathan could expose everything before Liesel had the chance to uncover the truth herself. And if Maxie confronted the impostor, he could become unpredictable, even dangerous. Liesel could not allow that. She needed time to observe, to investigate, to trace the scientific signature behind whoever had engineered this nightmare. Time to determine which Nathan was hers. Time to protect the innocent and identify the monster. But time was slipping away. Every moment the two Nathans existed simultaneously, the danger grew. If the wrong one attached himself to Maxie, if the real one was pushed aside or hidden, if Peter's influence still lingered in the shadows orchestrating all of this, Port Charles would soon find itself trapped in a labyrinth of identity, deception, and emotional sabotage. Liesel felt the urgency in her bones. She could not stand idle while her family's future splintered into pieces, so she steeled herself, allowing the cold, calculating part of her nature, the part she had spent years trying to bury, to rise again. If she had to slip back into the role of the woman the world once feared, if she had to follow trails that reeked of old crimes and forbidden science, she would. For Nathan. For the truth. For Maxie. For the child who deserved to know his father's real story, not the distorted reflection of a duplicated identity. Two Nathans meant two paths. Two lives. Two fates entangled in a web far bigger than any of them knew. And Liesel Obrecht, armed with grief sharpened into purpose, understood that she was the only one ruthless enough and desperate enough to tear the truth out of the darkness. No matter how deep she had to go or how many old demons she had to resurrect to get there. Because this time the stakes were not just emotional. They were genetic. They were existential. And for Liesel, the most terrifying part was also the most motivating. One of these men was her real son. And she would burn down every secret lab, every deceptive storyline, every manipulator in Port Charles if that was what it took to bring him home. If Peter truly stands behind everything unfolding in Port Charles, then Maxie's path toward forgiving Lulu becomes clearer than ever. After all, no one has ever been more susceptible to Peter's carefully constructed lies than Maxie herself, the woman who defended him against an entire town even when every warning sign was blazing directly in front of her. She shielded him from accusations, trusted him when no one else would, and clung to a version of him that never really existed. So if Lulu has fallen into one of his traps, why would Maxie blame her? She of all people knows how effortless Peter made deception look. And now, as new fractures appear in the story surrounding Nathan, the fingerprints of Peter's influence are impossible to ignore. The moment Nathan disrupted the chain of evidence at work, an act utterly out of character for the man he once was. The first alarm should have sounded. Add to that the unsettling fact that he has no memory of the last 7 years of his life, waking in the hospital as if reborn from a void, detached from the emotional bonds and moral instincts that defined him. These are not the behaviors of the Nathan Port Charles knew. They are symptoms of manipulation born from the mind of someone who excelled at rewriting people from the inside out. What makes it more disturbing is his behavior toward Maxie. Rather than showing fear, desperation, or even a flicker of concern for her while she lies in a coma, he diverts his attention to Lulu with inexplicable ease, flirting in ways that feel rehearsed rather than human. It is as though someone programmed him with just enough charm to pass as Nathan, but not enough depth to replicate the soul underneath. And no one in Port Charles has the history, the motive, or the twisted genius to orchestrate something this elaborate, except Peter. The sudden re-emergence of Peter, whether through rumors, shadows, or carefully planted chaos, suggests he is reclaiming the power he once held. His downfall robbed him of control of prestige and of the narrative he controlled so meticulously. But now with two Nathan figures destabilizing the emotional core of Maxie's world, Peter is tightening his grip again, pulling strings from whatever exile he resides in. This isn't just revenge. It's reclamation. It's Peter reasserting himself over Maxie's life, over the legacy he twisted, and over the identities he long believed he had the right to manipulate. The new adjustments taking shape aren't random plot twists. They are signs that Peter's old experiments, old obsessions, and old strategies are resurfacing. He is rewriting the story from behind the curtain, reclaiming lost power by destabilizing every emotional connection Nathan ever had. Lulu becomes a pawn, Maxie becomes the prize. And Nathan, or the version of Nathan currently walking around Port Charles, becomes the weapon. And the most frightening part, Peter never acts without intention. If he has engineered two Nathans or corrupted one beyond recognition, then this is only the beginning. He is not just returning. He is rebuilding his influence brick by brick, identity by identity, deception by deception, and Port Charles is once again at the mercy of a man who has always believed he was. On to Shab. For Felicia, the fight to protect the residents of Port Charles had never felt more suffocating, more disorienting, or more personally threatening than it did now. She had survived years of danger, kidnappings, betrayals, obsessions, and the long shadow of the Cassidines. But nothing compared to the terror of realizing that the very institution she trusted to keep the city safe had been infiltrated. The PCPD, a pillar of order in a town constantly teetering between chaos and catastrophe, was unknowingly sheltering a wolf wearing the face of a hero. And that wolf was the man everyone believed to be Nathan. The idea alone was enough to send a shiver through even the bravest souls. Nathan had once been the definition of integrity, steady, compassionate, principled. But the man now embedded within the department, walking through the halls, exchanging nods with officers, accessing confidential files and evidence, was no longer the Nathan they knew. His presence was a masquerade, a calculated insertion into the very heart of law enforcement, and worse still, hardly anyone suspected a thing. Only Felicia felt the shift. Only she noticed the subtle coldness in his eyes, the mismatched instincts, the detached way he moved through emotional situations that should have shattered him. It started as a whisper of suspicion, then grew into a haunting certainty. The man wearing Nathan's face was part of a much larger design, and that design was beginning to unfold right inside the PCPD. Every hour he remained undercover tightened the noose around Port Charles, and Felicia could feel time slipping away like sand through her fingers. She knew the town had been burned before by villains disguised as saviors phase on Peter. Even Ryan men who weaponized familiarity and trust as their deadliest tools. But this was different. This was deeper, more personal. Nathan's position in the PCPD granted him unrestricted access to classified investigations officer schedules, emergency protocols, and the vulnerabilities of every citizen who depended on the department for safety. And with each passing day, he grew bolder. Felicia couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, a command, a signal, the final piece of a plan that had been set in motion long before anyone realized what he was. And then came the secret. the secret so large it threatened to unmake everything Felicia believed she understood about the situation. Evidence surfaced quietly dangerously, suggesting that this impostor wasn't merely pretending to be Nathan. He was part of a larger network of identities manipulated, engineered, or weaponized by forces hidden far beneath Port Charles's surface. The realization struck Felicia with the weight of a collapsing world. The Nathan working inside the PCPD might not just be a fraud. He might be one of two Nathans now confirmed to exist. And whichever one stood inside the police force was almost certainly the more dangerous version. This revelation pushed Felicia into a state of relentless dread, because if there were two Nathans and only one was the real son of Liesl Obrecht, then the impostor had far more to gain and far more to destroy. His infiltration wasn't a coincidence. It was a move in a larger, more sinister strategy, one that someone somewhere had been building for years, waiting for the exact moment when Port Charles was vulnerable enough for the final blow. With every new clue, the shadow of Peter loomed larger. Felicia could see the echoes of his methods everywhere: the psychological manipulation, the surgical placement of pawns, the exploitation of emotional bonds to weaken defenses. Peter had always operated like a ghost, slipping between identities and truths, bending the lives of others to fit the narrative he wanted. If he had orchestrated this, if he had engineered a Nathan-shaped weapon to slip silently into the PCPD, then Port Charles was on the precipice of a crisis unlike anything it had endured before. And now with this knowledge, Felicia found herself trapped between fear and duty. She knew she needed to act to expose the truth before disaster erupted. But she also understood the danger of confronting a threat embedded so deeply within the city's protective core. One wrong move could unravel everything. One misstep could alert the impostor. And if he sensed she was onto him, there was no telling how quickly or violently he might strike. As the weight of the secret pressed heavier against her chest, Felicia realized something else. Maxie's return to the storyline wasn't just emotional timing. It was a ticking fuse. Maxie, tied to Nathan by love and history, unknowingly held the power to trigger or derail the impostor's plan. Her presence was the one variable that could throw everything off script, and that made her both the key to the truth and the most vulnerable target in the entire city. Felicia knew what was coming. A dangerous plan was unfolding in the shadows, reshaping the very foundation of Port Charles. Secrets were rising to the surface, loyalties were about to be tested, and a storm was gathering, one born from deception identity in the face of a man who no longer existed. And unless she acted quickly and precisely, the impostor within the PCPD would strike first.